Welcome to the Flowing Through SoCal video podcast. This is a video version of a podcast where we discuss water topics in Southern California with a heavy lean on stormwater. Today, we have Wayne Rosenbaum with the Environmental Law Group to talk through a couple of the aspects and details of the new CII permit, which is the Commercial, Industrial, and Institutional NPDES permit that is in draft form now. There's a lot to this, so I want to just jump right in. But first, Wayne, how about just a quick introduction? Again, thank you for joining me today, but just a quick introduction about what you do and what some of the projects that you work on are.
My pleasure, Sean. The Environmental Law Group is a small boutique firm, and my specific practice primarily deals with water quality and water rights. And in that area, we spend an awful lot of time looking at stormwater in multiple ways, in terms of new permits as they come along. This year in California, we got a new construction general permit. We're going to talk today about a CII permit, but helping people, one, make comments on these new permits as they're being promulgated. Two, helping people understand these new permits and some of the old permits so that they can understand their compliance options. And three, then defending our clients from claims either by the regulatory agencies or more frequently by third parties under the Clean Water Act citizen suit provisions. So that's kind of what we do.
So under these permits, these NPDES permits, you talk about the construction and the industrial permit. Those permits have with them requirements that you implement or identify pollutants and then identify the BMPs to reduce or eliminate those pollutants. And of course, collect samples to make sure that you are or are not reducing or eliminating those pollutants, and then reporting. So there's a whole process. So how did we get to this point with the CII permit where now we're looking at in this type of NPDES permit for individual discharges in the commercial space? How did we get here?
Well, the history is somewhat convoluted, but basically NRDC and a few other NGOs petitioned US EPA to say that they should use what's called their residual designation authority to regulate stormwater from new categories of discharges. And their argument to EPA was, look, if you look at an industrial parking lot and you look at a parking lot at a commercial, say a CVS or a Walmart, the activities that go on in those parking lots are the same. The pollutants that are being discharged are the same. And therefore, EPA, you should use your authority to regulate those commercial or institutional activities in the same way that you currently regulate, you require the state to regulate industrial activities. EPA looked at that initially and denied the petition. That denial of the petition went to the federal court. There was a series of litigation, and essentially what the court told EPA was that the basis for their denial was inadequate, and they either had to regulate these facilities or go back and do another determination as to why these facilities shouldn't be regulated. EPA, in my view, took the easy way out, and they said, okay, we'll just enter into a settlement with the plaintiffs, which they did. And that settlement then required first EPA for two limited watersheds to designate a whole new group of folks as being permittees. Think not just Walmarts or big box stores. Think hospitals, think churches, think private schools. All of these folks, we're going to designate them the same way we would heavy industry, and then have the Regional Water Quality Control Board for those two watersheds create a new permit that would implement the requirements on all of those new permittees. And that was how we got to where we started. And then what? September of last year, as you'll recall, EPA put out their residual designation authority memorandum. The regional board put out their draft permit. And then in October of last year, we all submitted comments. And here we are about a year later, and those comments are still being reviewed. So that kind of brings us up to date, I think.
Right. And so in the industrial space, industrial NPDES permitting space, the size of the property doesn't really drive anything other than, the how big your map is in your stormwater pollution prevention plan. So for these commercial facilities, is there a size that triggers?
Yes, and in the proposed permit, the facility would have to be a minimum of 5 acres. Now, there's lots of questions in the draft permit as to how you measure those 5 acres, how you measure it for an industrial facility versus, again, a commercial facility. And a lot of that turns on some of the things that we don't know. If the permit isn't clear as to who is the permittee, is it the landowner or is it the operator of that commercial activity? Is it the owner of the shopping center, or is it Hallmark Cards who happens to have 10,000 square feet of store in that facility? Who's going to be the permittee? And that's important because that's going to tell us, how do you define 5 acres? Um, if it's the entire facility, then if it's the owner, then it's the entire facility, then it is what it is. If it's, if it's the operator, then the question becomes, okay, Hallmark says, wait a minute, I only have a 10,000 square foot store. I'm a quarter of an acre. I'm not subject to this permit. But then who's subject to, uh, how do you deal with the 15 acres of parking lots that are in the common use areas? So those, we're still working through those questions. And I think this is part of why we haven't gotten response to comments yet as to who's going to be the legally responsible party, which is what we call it in the other permits, for compliance.
Right. And that individual or that entity would be responsible, have the financial means or at least responsibility to implement whatever treatment systems are required. So speaking of treatment systems, so again, under a typical NPDES permit, you're collecting samples and then you're comparing those sample results to some kind of benchmark. In this case, these two watersheds are under TMDLs. So this permit is proposing to collect samples and compare those to numeric effluent limits. Is that right?
Well, yes, in if I have the date right, 2031. Right now, those TMDLs have not yet come into effect. But if they do, and when they do, and I think it's 2031 or 32, then yes, you would have numeric effluent limits that you would have to achieve, depending, and here's another part of this permit that's sort of unique, on which compliance option the permittee chooses. And we have, and I'll try and keep it simple, but we have basically three compliance options. The first compliance option, the one that appears to be favored by at least the regional board, is that permittees would participate in regional water quality projects. That is, and I'll use Long Beach as an example. Long Beach has built a system called Long Beach Must, which is a major capture and treatment facility, which will capture nuisance flows, first flush stormwater, treat that stormwater ultimately to Title 22 standards, and then reuse that water. It becomes a water resource. And so under option one, hypothetically, a Walmart could come along and say, well, I need X number of units. I need so many gallons or so much capacity to meet my obligations. I'll go to the city of Long Beach and I'll buy into that project. Under that scenario, well, yes, they would still have some on-site obligations. They would not be obligated to meet the numeric effluent limits. That's one of the big advantages to option one. Option two, and we might as well go through all three options. Option two
Sure.
says that I am going to capture on my site a given amount of water defined by what's called the 85th percentile storm event. And I'm going to use it on site, discharge it to the sanitary sewer, or otherwise kind of make it infiltrate, make it go away without discharging it to the stormwater system. Option two may make sense, particularly for some heavy industry that has high water demands. You know, they'll just capture the rainwater and they'll bleed it into their system and use it. Some businesses may choose to take their stormwater and enter into an agreement with the sanitary district and meter it into the sanitary district. Although the more we look at that option, I suspect for many businesses that one will become cost prohibitive. Or, you know, maybe they can infiltrate, maybe they can find some other use for it. Maybe they can have rain, I don't know. But if you can capture and retain that 85th percentile storm event, you have met your requirements. And again, while you may have to sample anything that discharges beyond the 85th, under the current version of the permit, you don't have to meet the numeric effluent limits. The third option, which is sort of the poison pill, is I'm going to design, install, capture and treatment systems at my facility capable of capturing the stormwater. And now we're not talking about the 85th percentile anymore. We're talking about all the stormwater and treat it to a standard that would comply with the numeric effluent limits and the California water quality objectives. This is kind of like saying I'm going to capture my stormwater and I'm going to likely have to purify it to a level that exceeds drinking water standards. Now, I'm not saying that the engineers can't design that system for you. I just don't think anybody's going to want the price tag that goes along with it. So if you look at the three options, for some people, option two may work. I suspect the vast majority of potential permittees will be looking to option one, which will allow the communities in these watersheds to build large regional capture treatment systems, which can then capture that stormwater and either infiltrate it or pass it on for use as potable water augmentation. There are lots of good things that could come out of that, but I suspect that's the option that will ultimately be favored by most folks.
Right. So I could envision where you have the real estate. For example, Black and Veatch did Echo Lake Park some years ago, and I suppose something like that could be used as a wet pond treatment system. Other projects we've done around the country as well that sort of mimic that, either lake restoration or large stormwater, uh, stormwater treatment projects. So if I'm hearing this right, it sounds like the discharger, when they define who that is, could enter into an agreement to pay for, at least in part, for a project like that that would treat the water from their facility and other facilities in that watershed. And would this be some kind of ongoing, like every year you have to pay X amount of dollars to
Yeah,
remain
yeah.
in compliance?
Think of it in the same way you might think of if I were going to do a development and I need potable water. I end up paying two fees. I pay a connection fee, which is essentially my share of the capital costs to provide the water, build the infrastructure so that I have water for my project. Okay, that's the connection fee, and that's a
Okay.
one-time fee. And then I still pay for the water on an ongoing basis because there's, the cost of the O&M costs of getting the water and treating the water and sending the water to my place. This is just sort of kind of the reverse. I'm going to pay a connection fee, if you will, or a fee to build the capture facility. And then I'm going to pay an annual fee of some amount that represents my share of the operating and maintenance costs to operate that facility into perpetuity.
So these facilities will probably most likely be designed and constructed by the municipalities. I can't imagine a private entity building one of these large regional BMPs. So city of Hawthorne or Torrance or or Long Beach, they'll have to, so they'll have to procure the funding. So what I'm wondering now is Measure W in Los Angeles, that pot of money from the parcel tax is designed to, fund these type of large regional projects. Why is it possible that as part of this CII permit that the permittee could just pay into Measure W, and then Hawthorne and Torrance would seek through the feasibility study process, seek to gain the money to build that project? And so, because I'm just unclear as to how a Walmart or a Home Depot that has this 5-acre parcel, how are they going to pay? Who are they going to pay to
Okay.
build this? That's the confusion, I think, on my end.
Let's break it into two pieces: sources and uses. Okay. In terms of how would they pay, it is what the permit requires is that Walmart would enter into a contractual agreement. You're right, with some form of a public agency that says, and the public agency says, we're going to, and here's another place that is not clear. We're going to build, or we have built, a capture system capable of capturing 100-acre feet, and you, Walmart, need 2-acre feet, and here's what we're going to charge you for your share of the capital costs, and here's what we're going to charge you annually for your O&M costs. That contract then has to be approved by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, but that's the structure, if you will. The other question you've kind of asked is, hey, is it fair to have to pay both a tax, which is what Measure W is, and then on top of that, a fee or an additional fee to participate in this program? And the logic of that is, and I'm not saying the fairness, but the logic is the tax is the tax is the tax, and everybody pays based on the rules of the tax. The fee, if you will, is discretionary. Walmart, you don't have to pay into that system. You don't have to contract with the city of York. You can do option 2, option 3. You're not forced to do this. Now, will those funds ultimately commingle? Absolutely. I would suspect that what you're going to kind of see is something like this. City builds project using Measure W funds. Along comes Walmart, and we shouldn't pick up just on Walmart. Along comes Lowe's, and Lowe's says, I want to buy capacity out of that project. Well, that money that Lowe's then pays to buy capacity can be used by the city to build the next project. They can't just take the money and run. Okay. The money has to be directly related to some sort of stormwater capture and regional capture and treatment system. So I suspect that procedurally, that's the way it may play out. Measure W money as initial seed money and funding money, then that builds things that then gets sold off under the CII permit to generate more money to build more things in conjunction with Measure W. The other thing that the CII permit does that is a lot sketchier under Measure W is the CII option 1 secures O&M money into perpetuity. Measure W doesn't necessarily do that. So
Right.
you may have the scenario where you get Measure W money to build it, and you get CII money essentially to operate it.
Right, and there's definitely a couple of dust ups happening right now with some of the agencies that have built structures under Measure W funding that now are seeking O&M monies and maybe some type of amendment to how you could distribute from Measure W or a new submittal requesting O&M funds post-mortem. So there's definitely some movement there. But I tell you, Wayne, to me, this is earth shattering because these commercial facilities and industrial facilities that haven't been covered and institutional facilities like churches and universities, they have never seen something like this before where you have to enroll in, develop a SWIP, implement BMPs, collect stormwater discharge samples, contract with a laboratory, all those things that go along with these NPDES permits, they've never had to do before. So I'm curious to see how this rolls down to these potential landowners or whoever the LRP is, and how the board disseminates this information to them, and who enrolls and who doesn't enroll. I mean, we had
Right.
how many non-filers under the industrial general permit in 2015? It took them 5 years to wrangle all those folks up, right?
Well, two thoughts here. One, I suspect the non-filers here are going to be much easier to find because all you have to do is to look at a zoning map, identify all the parcels that are zoned commercial or institutional. If they're bigger than 5 acres, assuming it is the property owner that becomes the permittee, and they're in. I mean, that's a pretty easy exercise. I think the other side of this is, and here I am speculating, but it would not surprise me under option one if essentially the ultimate permit simply said buy into a regional project and you're done. You're not going to have to do anything more on site. You're not going to have to sample on site for all the reasons that you indicate. Because I don't think that when you start telling, Sacred Heart Church, oh, by the way, now you're going to have to prepare a stormwater pollution prevention plan and hire a QUISP and do this sampling, et cetera, et cetera. You are now talking to the voters, and voters can have powers that generally industry doesn't have because they vote. I suspect that you're going to see that. I think they're going to make it uh, so enticing to be in option one that everybody's going to look at the other options and go, "What are you kidding me?" Um,
Yeah, it seems that the overarching desire is to have funding for large regional treatment. So, just wrapping up, what's the next step here? So we have the draft version out. Public comments have been received. Allegedly, they're working on addressing these comments. So what are we looking at for a timetable moving forward, approximately?
well, much like the play Waiting for Godot, we are still waiting. We have been promised that we're going to get a revised draft permit. Well, I think we were supposed to get one in July and then in August, and now maybe sometime in September. Uh, I think that I suspect, and this is anecdotal supposition, that both the regional board staff and EPA um, have come to the realization that there are a lot of issues here that have to be resolved. Who's in, who's out, who's the permittee? How do you really define, a regional project? All of those issues have really need still to be worked through with a great deal more clarity. There's also the question of whether or not EPA's memorandum is sufficient to trigger their residual designation authority, or whether they have to go through the Administrative Procedures Act process. So it's coming, folks. It's going to come. It may not be today, may not be tomorrow, but this kind of permit is coming. And at least in California, the California legislature appears to be willing to take this kind of permit statewide for all urban areas. We saw that in the previous legislative session, although the governor vetoed the bill at that point. I believe that once the permit gets straightened out for these two watersheds, we can expect that permit to expand statewide. And what happens in California? doesn't stay in California.
Right, exactly. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for joining today. I think what we want to do is have you back as soon as we get the next version, we get the second draft or the official version of this CII permit released to the public. I think we're going to want to have you come back, and we'll take a deeper dive into some of the elements of that permit. But I thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too, Sean. It's always a pleasure.